Have you ever opened your door to someone, only to watch them tear your life apart? That moment when kindness becomes your biggest regret? I can't stop thinking about Ava Mitchell, a single mom who spotted a well-dressed stranger shivering in a snowstorm and made a choice that would shatter her carefully built world. She had no idea that bringing this wealthy CEO into her modest apartment would expose the secret she'd protected for 12 years. Her son. You should have seen his face when he realized. The way his eyes widened, then narrowed. How quickly warmth turned to ice. How fast gratitude became accusation. What would you do if someone from your past suddenly reappeared, demanding answers to questions you'd buried long ago? Is forgiveness even possible when the wounds run that deep? Before we get into the mess, my best friend bet me lunch that we wouldn't hit our subscriber goal this month. I'm trying to eat good, so do me a favor and smash that subscribe button. It is totally free and means the world to me. Drop a comment with your city so I know who I'm talking to. Now sit back and enjoy this story of how one act of kindness unleashed 12 years of buried secrets. The first snowfall of December had turned vicious by nightfall. Ava Mitchell pulled her threadbare coat tighter as she hurried home from her second shift at Mercy Hospital. The wind cut through the fabric like it wasn't even there, but she couldn't afford to replace it, not with Danny's medication costs doubling last month. 12 years of single motherhood had taught her to endure worse than bitter cold. The streetlights along Westbrook Avenue flickered as she turned the corner toward her apartment building. Most of the neighborhood was already dark, windows glowing with the blue light of television screens or holiday decorations. Ava kept her head down against the wind, focusing on each step through the accumulating snow. That's when she saw him. A man in an expensive overcoat was leaning against a lamppost, his head bowed. Even from 20 feet away, she could see he was shivering violently. His formal shoes, completely impractical for the weather, were buried in snow, and he seemed to be struggling to stay upright. Ava hesitated. In this neighborhood, you minded your own business. That was the unspoken rule. But something about the way he swayed made her medical training kick in. "Sir? Are you all right?" she called, still keeping her distance. He looked up, and Ava felt a strange jolt. Even disoriented, his face carried a striking handsomeness that seemed vaguely familiar. His dark hair was dusted with snow, and his eyes, unfocused as they were, held an unusual intensity. "I'm fine," he managed, though his voice suggested otherwise. "Just waiting for my driver." Ava glanced around the deserted street. "In this storm, how long have you been out here?" "Not sure. My phone died." He attempted to straighten up but winced, one hand going to his temple. "I was at the Riverside Foundation Gala. Got a headache, stepped outside for air, and then—" He gestured vaguely at the empty street. The Riverside Foundation. That explained the tuxedo visible beneath his open coat. The annual charity event was legendary in the city, a gathering of wealth and influence that people like Ava only read about in the local paper. "You're about 8 blocks from Riverside Hall," she said gently. "And in this weather, I don't think any drivers are getting through. The plows haven't even made it to this neighborhood yet." He blinked slowly, seeming to process this information with difficulty. Ava recognized the signs of mild hypothermia setting in. The temperature had dropped below 15 degrees, and in those clothes, he wouldn't last much longer. "Look," she said, making a decision she might regret. "My apartment is right there. You can come warm up, call for help. It's not safe out here." Under normal circumstances, Ava would never invite a stranger into her home. But Dan was sleeping over at his friend's house tonight, and something about this man's disorientation worried her professional instincts. He wasn't drunk, she could tell that much. More like someone who'd had a mild concussion. "I don't want to impose," he said, his words slightly slurred from the cold. "You're not imposing if I'm offering," Ava replied, her nurse's voice taking over. "And if you stay out here much longer, you'll end up in my ER with frostbite." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded and pushed himself away from the lamppost. He swayed slightly, and Ava instinctively moved to steady him, her hand catching his arm. Even through his expensive coat, she could feel how cold he was. "I'm Ava," she said, guiding him toward her building. "James," he replied. "James Frederick." The name tickled something in her memory, but Ava was too focused on getting him inside to dwell on it. The 4-flight walk-up to her apartment was slow going. By the 3rd floor, James was breathing heavily, and Ava wondered if he was in worse shape than she'd initially thought. Her apartment was small but tidy, a living room that flowed into a kitchenette, 2 bedrooms down a short hallway, and a bathroom that was perpetually in need of better ventilation. It wasn't much, but it was home. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to her worn couch. "I'll make tea." James sank onto the cushions, looking oddly out of place in his formal wear. His gaze traveled around the room, taking in the mismatched furniture, the carefully patched curtains, the small artificial Christmas tree with handmade ornaments in the corner. "Thank you," he said quietly. Not many people would help a stranger these days. Ava filled the kettle, keeping her back to him as she spoke. "I'm a nurse. Hard habit to break." "At Mercy Hospital?" he asked, noticing the ID badge she'd forgotten to remove. "For the past 14 years, she replied, setting 2 mugs on the counter. "Though they're cutting staff again, so who knows for how much longer?" James frowned. "I thought Mercy just received a major funding grant." "For new equipment, not staff," Ava explained, bringing him a steaming mug. "Here, this should help warm you up." As she handed him the tea, their fingers brushed, and Ava felt an unexpected spark of connection. She quickly pulled away, unsettled by her reaction. It had been years since she'd felt anything like that, not since Michael. James took a sip of tea, color slowly returning to his face. "This is good. Thank you. It's just tea," she said with a small smile. "Nothing special." "Kindness is always special," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with surprising warmth. Ava looked away first, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze. "Your phone, do you need to charge it?" "If you don't mind." She plugged his expensive device into her charger, noticing the custom case with subtle gold initials. Everything about him screamed wealth, from his perfectly tailored tuxedo to his watch that probably cost more than her annual rent. "So," she said, sitting in the armchair across from him, "the Riverside Foundation Gala. That's quite an event." James nodded, his expression shifting slightly. "Family obligation more than choice. My father was one of the founding donors." "Frederick," Ava said suddenly, the name clicking into place. "As in Frederick Medical Technologies?" A flicker of resignation crossed his face. "Yes, that's the family business." Now she understood why he'd seemed familiar. The Fredericks were practically royalty in the city. Their company supplied medical equipment to hospitals nationwide, including Mercy. She'd probably seen his photo in the company newsletter or on some donor plaque in the hospital lobby. "I should have recognized you," she said, feeling strangely embarrassed. "I prefer when people don't," he admitted. "Makes conversations more genuine." Before Ava could respond, a key turned in the lock. She froze. Danny wasn't supposed to be home tonight. The door swung open, and her 12-year-old son stepped in, shaking snow from his dark hair. "Mom, Mr. Brenner drove me home. The roads got too bad for the sleepover, and—" He stopped abruptly, noticing James on the couch. "Danny?" Ava said, rising quickly. "I thought you were staying at Dylan's." "His dad said it wasn't safe with a storm," Danny explained, his curious gaze fixed on their visitor. "Who's this?" James stood, extending his hand with a warm smile. "James Frederick. Your mother rescued me from turning into an icicle out there." Danny shook his hand, a gesture that always made Ava's heart twist. He was growing up so fast, already showing the mannerisms of the man he would become. "Cool. Did you get caught in the storm too?" "Something like that," James replied. As Danny removed his coat, Ava noticed James's expression change. He was staring at her son with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. His face had gone pale again, but not from cold. "Danny, why don't you go get changed?" Ava suggested, sensing something was wrong. "There's leftover pasta if you're hungry." "Okay," Danny agreed, seemingly oblivious to the sudden tension. He disappeared down the hallway, leaving Ava alone with James, who hadn't taken his eyes off the spot where her son had been standing. "Are you all right?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." James turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable. "Your son, how old is he?" 12, Ava answered cautiously. Why? And his father? The question came out strained. Ava stiffened. Not in the picture. Never has been. James set down his mug with a hand that wasn't quite steady. I'm sorry for asking. It's just... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. He reminds me of someone. Something in his tone made Ava's protective instincts flare. My son isn't anyone's business but mine. Of course, James said quickly. I apologize. An awkward silence fell between them. James's phone chimed from the counter, indicating it had enough charge to power on. Ava retrieved it, glad for the distraction. You should be able to call your driver now, she said, handing him the device. James took the phone but didn't immediately use it. Instead, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Ava, what's your last name? The question sent an inexplicable chill through her. Mitchell, why? And before that, your maiden name? Ava took a step back. I don't see how that's relevant. Please, James said, his voice suddenly urgent. It's important. Calloway, she answered reluctantly. Ava Calloway. The color drained completely from James's face. He sank back onto the couch, staring at her as though seeing her for the first time. Ava Calloway, he repeated softly. From Westlake University. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Ava's feet. No one had connected her to that name, to that place, in 12 years. How do you know that? Because, James said, his voice barely audible. I was there too. Different name back then. I was James Frederick before I took my mother's maiden name after graduation. The world around Ava seemed to freeze. James Frederick. The name she'd tried so hard to forget. The name she'd searched for endlessly 12 years ago before finally accepting he'd vanished from her life. The father of her son. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's not possible. But even as she denied it, memories flooded back. Jamie had been a scholarship student like her, brilliant and ambitious, with the same intense eyes that now watched her from across the room. They'd been inseparable for that one perfect semester, until she'd discovered she was pregnant, and he'd disappeared without a trace. It is possible, James said quietly. And I think we both know it's true. In the kitchen, Danny's footsteps approached. Ava's heart hammered in her chest. 12 years of carefully constructed stability threatened to crumble around her. Mom, there's no more pasta, Danny called, rounding the corner. Can I make a sandwich instead? Ava couldn't speak. She watched as James turned to look at her son, really look at him. Danny had always been the spitting image of his father, from his dark, wavy hair to the distinctive cleft in his chin. The resemblance was undeniable. Sure, honey, she finally managed. Whatever you want. Danny glanced between them, sensing the tension. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Ava assured him, though nothing felt further from the truth. Mr. Frederick was just about to call. His driver. James seemed to understand her silent plea. He nodded, rising from the couch. That's right. Thank you for the tea and shelter, Miss Mitchell. No problem, Danny answered for her. That's what Mom does. She helps people. The simple statement hung in the air between them. James's gaze lingered on Danny for a moment longer before he turned to Ava. Could I speak with you privately before I go? Ava hesitated, then nodded. Danny, make your sandwich. I'll be right back. She led James to the small entryway, keeping her voice low. This isn't happening. Not now, not like this. Ava, he began, his voice equally quiet but intense. I never knew. I swear to you, I never knew about him. You disappeared, she hissed. No calls, no messages, nothing. Because I thought you disappeared, James countered. I came back from winter break, and you were gone. No one would tell me anything. I tried to find you for months. Ava stared at him in disbelief. That's not possible. I called you dozens of times. I left messages with your roommate. I wrote letters. I never got any of them. James insisted when the first return from break my roommate had moved out. There was someone new who claimed he'd never heard of you. A cold realization began to dawn on Ava. Your family, she whispered. The scholarship that suddenly got revoked. The administrator who told me you'd transferred to another university. James's expression darkened. My father, it has to be. He was obsessed with my potential. Nothing could interfere with the future he'd planned. So he erased me, Ava said. the pieces falling into place. And you never questioned it? I did question it, James replied, pain evident in his voice. But everyone told me the same story, that you dropped out and left no forwarding address. Eventually, I had to accept it. Ava leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. 12 years of struggling alone, of building a life from nothing, of telling Danny that his father simply wasn't part of their story, all of it based on a lie. He doesn't know about you, she said finally. Danny, I told him his father was someone I met briefly who moved abroad before I knew I was pregnant. James nodded slowly. I understand. You did what you had to do. And now? Ava asked, the question hanging between them. Before James could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. My driver. He's managed to get within a few blocks. You should go, Ava said, relief and disappointment mingling strangely in her chest. Ava, James said, his hand reaching for hers but stopping short. This isn't over. We have a lot to talk about. I know, she admitted, but not tonight, not with Danny here. James nodded, understanding in his eyes. Tomorrow then, can I come back? The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. Ava thought of all the years she'd spent building walls around her heart, around her son. Letting James in would change everything. Yes, she said finally. Tomorrow afternoon, Danny will be at his robotics club until 5. Relief washed over James's face. Thank you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back. My personal number, in case you change your mind. Ava took the card, their fingers brushing again. This time she didn't pull away immediately. Goodbye, James, she said softly. Until tomorrow, Ava, he replied, opening the door to the still raging storm. After he left, Ava stood in the entryway, the business card clutched in her hand. Her carefully constructed world had just been upended by a chance encounter in a snowstorm. Tomorrow would bring questions she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. In the kitchen, Danny was finishing his sandwich, oblivious to the fact that his father had just walked out their door. Oblivious to how completely their lives were about to change. Ava tucked the card into her pocket and went to join her son, wondering how many more secrets tomorrow would reveal. If you're still with me, hit that like button right now. I want to know if you've ever had a moment where your past came crashing into your present. Drop a comment below and tell me how you handled it. Now, let's see what happens when James returns the next day. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Ava had barely slept, her mind replaying the encounter with James over and over. She'd spent 12 years believing he had abandoned her, only to discover they had both been manipulated by his family. Mom, are you okay? Danny asked over breakfast. You seem weird today. Ava forced a smile. Just tired, honey. Long shift yesterday. Danny studied her with the perceptiveness that sometimes caught her off guard. At 12, he was already showing signs of the man he would become. Thoughtful, observant, with an intelligence that sometimes left his teachers struggling to keep up. Was it that guy from last night? He asked. He kept looking at me funny. Ava nearly choked on her coffee. What do you mean? Danny shrugged. I don't know. Like he was trying to figure something out. It was weird. He was just disoriented from the cold, Ava said, hoping her voice sounded more convincing to Danny than it did to her own ears. If you say so. Danny didn't look convinced. Anyway, don't forget I have robotics club after school. Mr. Patel said we might stay late to finish our project for the competition. I remember, Ava said, grateful for the change of subject. I'll pick you up at 5. After Danny left for school, Ava called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. She couldn't focus on patients today, not with her own life in such turmoil. Instead, she pulled out a small box from the back of her closet, a collection of memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. Inside were photos of her and Jamie from college. His smile was the same, though his face had matured. There were ticket stubs from concerts they'd attended, notes they'd passed in class, and at the very bottom, the last letter she'd written him before she realized he wasn't coming back. The letter explaining she was pregnant. The letter he claimed he never received. By the time the doorbell rang at 2 o'clock, Ava had cleaned the apartment twice and changed her outfit 3 times. She took a deep breath before opening the door. James stood there, looking different in casual clothes. Jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but still a far cry from last night's tuxedo. He held a small paper bag. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied, stepping back to let him in. An awkward silence fell between them as they stood in her living room, 12 years of separation stretching like an unbridgeable chasm. "I brought coffee," James finally said, holding up the bag. "I remembered you liked it with vanilla." The fact that he remembered such a small detail after all this time made something twist in Ava's chest. "Thanks." They sat across from each other, just as they had the night before, but everything had changed. The pretense of strangers was gone, replaced by the weight of their shared history. "I spent all night thinking about this," James began. "About you, about Danny, about what my father must have done." "And?" Ava prompted when he fell silent. "And I'm angry." His voice rose slightly before he controlled it again. "I'm angry that he stole 12 years from me. From us. From Danny." Ava set her coffee down. "James, I need to understand what happened. All of it." He nodded, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. "When I left for winter break that year, we were happy. We had plans. I was going to bring you home to meet my mother." "But not your father," Ava noted. "No," James admitted. "He was difficult. I wanted to wait until after graduation, but then my mother got sick over the break. Cancer. It was bad. And suddenly my father was focusing all his attention on me, on my future with the company. And then you came back to school and I was gone," Ava said quietly. James nodded. "They told me you'd withdrawn. When I tried to call, your number was disconnected. I went to your apartment, but new students had moved in. They said they didn't know where you'd gone." "Because your father had my scholarship revoked," Ava said, the old anger rising again. "The dean called me in and said there had been a review of my financial aid. Suddenly I couldn't afford tuition, couldn't stay in student housing, and when I tried to reach you—" "Let me guess," James said bitterly. "They told you I'd transferred." "To Princeton," Ava confirmed. "Your roommate, what was his name? Todd? He told me you'd left a message for me, that you needed a fresh start." James's face darkened. "Todd was my father's godson. I never knew until years later." The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of calculated cruelty that took Ava's breath away. "So your father orchestrated all of it to keep us apart?" "Because you weren't part of his plan for me," James said, "a poor scholarship student with no connections. You were a distraction at best, a liability at worst. And if he'd known I was pregnant—" Ava couldn't finish the thought. "He would have done worse," James said grimly. "Much worse." Ava stood up abruptly, needing to move. "Do you know what it was like? Being 20 years old, pregnant, suddenly without a school or a home. Having to tell my parents I'd thrown away my future, working 3 jobs until I was 8 months along because I refused to take their money." James flinched at each question. "Ava, No!" She cut him off. "You don't get to say you're sorry. Not yet. Not until you understand what your father took from me. From Danny." "I do understand," James said, rising to face her. "Or I'm trying to. But Ava, he took something from me too. My son. 12 years I can never get back." They stood facing each other, both breathing hard, years of pain and loss hanging in the air between them. "What do you want from me, James?" Ava finally asked, her voice quieter now. "Why are you here?" "I want to know my son," he answered without hesitation. "I want a chance to be his father." The simplicity of his answer caught her off guard. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" James challenged. "Because Danny doesn't know you exist," Ava exclaimed. "Because he has a life, a routine. Because I've spent 12 years protecting him from feeling abandoned, and now you want to walk in and change everything." "I didn't abandon him," James said, his voice tight with emotion. "I didn't abandon you. I was lied to, just like you were." Ava sank back onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "I know, but that doesn't change the fact that Danny will be hurt and confused. He'll have questions I don't know how to answer. James sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance. We can figure it out together, if you'll let me. And what about your father? Ava asked. The man who went to such lengths to keep us apart. What happens when he finds out about Danny? A shadow crossed James's face. My father is still the majority shareholder in Frederick Medical. He's semi-retired, but he still has influence. That's not an answer. Because I don't have one yet, James admitted. But I'm not the same person I was 12 years ago, Ava. I don't need his approval anymore. Ava studied his face, looking for any trace of the boy she'd once loved in the man sitting beside her. And what about your life now? Are you married? Children? No, James said. There was someone a few years ago. It didn't work out. Why not? He looked away. She said I was never fully present, that I was always searching for something. The implication hung in the air between them. Had he been searching for her all these years, even without realizing it? James, Ava said carefully, I need you to understand something. Danny is my priority, always. If this is going to happen, if you're going to be part of his life, it has to be for the long haul. You can't just satisfy your curiosity and then disappear. I would never do that, James said, meeting her gaze steadily. He's my son. The word sent a shiver through Ava. For 12 years, Danny had been hers alone. The thought of sharing him, of watching him form a bond with the father she'd told him didn't want them, was both terrifying and somehow inevitable. We need to take this slowly, she said finally. Very slowly. Relief washed over James's face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ava warned. I haven't agreed to anything. I need time to think, to figure out how to tell Danny. Of course, James nodded. Whatever you need. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decisions yet to be made hanging between them. Tell me about him, James said suddenly. What's he like? A small smile touched Ava's lips despite herself. He's brilliant, too smart for his own good sometimes. He loves robotics and science fiction and terrible puns that make me groan. He's kind, even when it costs him. He stands up for kids who get bullied at school. He sounds amazing, James said softly. He is, Ava agreed. And he's happy, James. Despite everything, he's a happy kid. Because of you, James said. You did that, Ava. You gave him a good life. Before she could respond, her phone rang. Ava glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Danny's school. Ava answered quickly, her heart racing. Hello? This is Ava Mitchell. James watched as her expression shifted from concern to confusion. He what? No, I didn't send anyone. Who? I see. Yes, I'll be right there. She hung up, her face pale. What's wrong? James asked, already on his feet. Someone tried to pick Danny up from school, Ava said, grabbing her coat. A man claiming to be his uncle sent by me. When the school called to verify, he left. James's expression hardened. What did he look like? They said he was older, well-dressed, gray hair, expensive suit. Ava's eyes widened as realization dawned. James, you don't think... My father, he said grimly. It has to be. How would he even know about Danny? Ava demanded, panic rising in her voice. James was already pulling out his phone. The driver who picked me up last night works for my father's service. He must have reported where he found me, in whose apartment. And your father put it together, Ava finished, her hands shaking as she searched for her keys. How could he move this fast? Because that's what he does, James said, his voice tight with anger. He eliminates problems before they become threats. My son is not a problem, Ava snapped, fear making her voice sharp. To him, Danny is the biggest problem imaginable, James replied, following her to the door. A secret heir who could challenge everything he's built. Ava stopped short. What do you mean, heir? James hesitated. There's something I haven't told you about the company structure. Now is not the time for corporate talk. Ava yanked open the door. I need to get to my son. I'm coming with you, James said firmly. No, Ava turned on him. You've done enough. Your family has done enough. The hurt on his face was immediate, But Ava couldn't bring herself to care. All that mattered was getting to Danny. "Ava, please," James said quietly. "Let me help fix this. My car is downstairs with a driver. We'll get there faster." She wanted to refuse, to push him away and handle this herself as she'd handled everything for the past 12 years. But he was right. His car would be faster than waiting for a bus or trying to find a taxi in this neighborhood. "Fine," she conceded, "but this doesn't change anything." The ride to Danny's school was tense, neither of them speaking. Ava stared out the window, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if James's father had succeeded? What if Danny was already gone? "He's safe," James said, as if reading her thoughts. "The school did exactly what they should have done. They called you." "This time," Ava said, not looking at him. "What about next time?" James had no answer for that. When they arrived at the school, Ava was out of the car before it fully stopped. James followed close behind as she rushed to the main office. Danny was sitting in a chair outside the principal's office, looking confused and a little worried. When he saw Ava, relief washed over his face. "Mom, what's going on?" "Miss Patel wouldn't let me go to robotics club." Ava pulled him into a tight hug, her heart still pounding. "It's okay, honey. There was just a mix-up." Danny pulled back, noticing James for the first time. "Mr. Frederick? What are you doing here?" Before either adult could answer, the principal's door opened. "Ms. Mitchell, could you come in, please? We need to discuss this incident." Ava hesitated, looking between Danny and James. "I'll stay with him," James offered quietly. "No," Ava said firmly. "Danny, come with me." The principal, a stern woman named Dr. Rivera, gestured them into her office. "Mr. Frederick, perhaps you could wait outside?" "Actually," James said, stepping forward, "I believe I can help explain the situation." Dr. Rivera looked to Ava, who reluctantly nodded. The four of them entered the office, Danny growing more confused by the second. "Mom, what's happening?" he asked as they sat down. "Who tried to pick me up?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Ava said, squeezing his hand. Dr. Rivera folded her hands on her desk. "Ms. Mitchell, a man claiming to be Danny's uncle arrived about an hour ago. He said you had sent him to collect Danny for a family emergency. Fortunately, our receptionist followed protocol and called you to verify." "I don't have any uncles," Danny said, frowning. "Mom's an only child, and my dad—" He stopped, suddenly looking at James with new awareness. The room went very still. "Danny," Ava began, her voice shaking slightly. "Is that why you were looking at me like that last night?" Danny asked James directly, his young face suddenly serious beyond his years. Are you my father?" The directness of the question stunned all three adults. Ava felt tears spring to her eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Not here, not like this. James looked to Ava, silently asking permission. After a moment, she nodded slightly. "Yes," James said quietly. "I am." Danny's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Shock, confusion, anger, curiosity. "But Mom said my dad moved away before I was born, that he didn't know about me." "That's what I believed," Ava said gently. "I thought he had left without knowing I was pregnant. But it turns out we were both lied to." "By who?" Danny demanded. "By my father," James answered. "He didn't approve of our relationship. He made sure your mother and I lost contact with each other." Dr. Rivera, clearly uncomfortable with this family drama unfolding in her office, cleared her throat. "Perhaps this conversation should continue at home? Our immediate concern is the unauthorized person who attempted to remove Danny from school." "Yes," Ava agreed, grateful for the interruption. "Dr. Rivera, I believe the man was James's father. He must have found out about Danny and—" "And what?" Danny asked, his voice rising. "Why would he try to take me?" James and Ava exchanged a look. "It's complicated," James said. "But I promise you, Danny, I won't let him near you again." "I don't even know you." Danny stood up suddenly. "You can't just show up and make promises. Where have you been for 12 years? "Danny," Ava reached for him, but he pulled away. No, you always said he didn't want us, that he left before knowing about me. But now you're saying someone lied. Which is it, Mom? The hurt and confusion in his voice broke Ava's heart. Honey, I only found out the truth last night. I was going to tell you, but I needed time to figure out how. Well, now I know, Danny said, tears welling in his eyes. Can we go home? Please? Dr. Rivera nodded sympathetically. Of course. But Ms. Mitchell, we'll need to update Danny's file with specific instructions about who is and is not authorized to pick him up. I'll take care of it right away, Ava promised, gathering her purse. And thank you for protecting my son. Outside the office, Danny walked ahead of them, his shoulders hunched, refusing to look at either adult. I should go, James said quietly to Ava. This isn't how I wanted things to happen. None of this is how I wanted things to happen, Ava replied, watching her son. But your father has forced our hand. We need to deal with this now. I'll handle my father, James said, his voice hardening. But first, let me drive you both home. It's not safe for you to take public transportation right now. Ava wanted to refuse, to maintain some control over this spiraling situation, but the thought of her son's safety overrode her pride. Fine. But when we get home, Danny and I need time alone. To talk. James nodded. Of course. The ride back to Ava's apartment was silent and tense. Danny stared out the window, refusing to acknowledge either of them. When they arrived, he went straight to his room without a word. I'll call you later, James said, as Ava prepared to follow her son. After you've had time to talk. Ava paused at the door. James, your father tried to take my son today. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. What did you mean when you said Danny was an heir? James sighed heavily. When my grandfather founded the company, he put a clause in the corporate charter. Any biological child of mine automatically becomes a beneficiary of the family trust at age 13, with significant voting rights in the company. Ava stared at him. And Danny turns 13 in 3 months. Yes, James confirmed. If my father can prove Danny is my son, he'll try to control him, and his shares. If he can't control him, he'll try to make him disappear, Ava finished, cold fear washing over her. Legally, I mean. My father doesn't believe in losing, James said grimly. He'll do whatever it takes to maintain control of the company. Then we need to be ready, Ava said, straightening her shoulders. Because I don't believe in losing either, not when it comes to my son. As James turned to leave, Ava called after him. James, when you talk to your father, remember that Danny is watching. Whatever happens next will shape how he sees you, how he understands what it means to be a man. James nodded solemnly. I know, and Ava, I'm sorry for all of it. I know, she said softly before closing the door. Hey, if you're still with me, I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're enjoying this story. Now, let's see what happens when James confronts his father. James Frederick stood in the lobby of Frederick Tower, staring up at the gleaming edifice his grandfather had built and his father had expanded into a medical technology empire. For the first time in his life, he felt like an outsider here. The security guard recognized him immediately. Good afternoon, Mr. Frederick. Your father is expecting you. Of course he was. Nothing happened in Richard Frederick's world without his knowledge and approval, including, apparently, attempts to abduct his own grandson. The executive elevator whisked James to the top floor. His father's assistant, Marion, gave him a tight smile as he approached. She'd been with his father for 30 years and knew everything about the Frederick family, including, James now realized, secrets kept from him. He's waiting for you, she said, not meeting his eyes. James didn't bother to knock before entering the corner office. Richard Frederick stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the door, looking out over the city he considered his domain. At 72, he still cut an imposing figure, tall, straight-backed, with a full head of silver hair. I wondered how long it would take you to come storming in here, Richard said without turning around. Dramatic as always, Jamie. You tried to take her son from school, James said, his voice dangerously quiet. My son. Now Richard turned, his face impassive. I merely wanted to meet the boy, see if the resemblance was as striking as my driver suggested. By lying to his school? By claiming to be his uncle? James moved further into the room, anger radiating from him. He's 12 years old, Dad. You terrified him. Richard waved a dismissive hand. The boy was never in any danger. I simply wanted information before you did something foolish. Like what? Acknowledge my own child. Like upend the entire corporate structure 3 months before the Westbrook merger. Richard's calm facade cracked slightly. Do you have any idea what you've done? That boy turns 13 in February. The moment he does, the trust activates. James crossed his arms. I'm well aware of grandfather's provision. Are you? Richard challenged, moving to his desk. Because from where I stand, you've handed a controlling interest in this company to a child who knows nothing about our business, our legacy. A child raised by a woman who has every reason to hate this family. Because of what you did to her, James shot back. You destroyed her life, Dad. You took away her scholarship, her housing, her future. You made sure I believed she'd abandoned me, and that she believed I'd abandoned her. Also, you could keep your precious corporate succession plan intact. Richard's expression hardened. I did what was necessary to protect this family. That girl was nobody, a scholarship case with no connections, no future beyond what she could leech from you. She would have dragged you down, ruined everything we built. She was the woman I loved. James slammed his hand on the desk. And Danny is my son, your grandson, your blood. A bastard born to a gold digger, Richard snapped. James went very still. Don't you ever speak about them that way again. The two men stared at each other across the desk, decades of unspoken tension crackling between them. What do you want, Dad? James finally asked. Why did you really try to get to Danny today? Richard sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. I wanted to assess the situation, see if there was a way to contain this before it becomes public. Contain it how? Financial arrangements could be made, Richard said carefully. The woman, Ava, James interrupted. Her name is Ava. Fine. Ava could be compensated generously. The boy could be provided for, college opportunities, but quietly, privately. No legal acknowledgement, no press, no disruption to the company. James stared at his father in disbelief. You want to buy them off? Pay them to disappear? I want to protect what 3 generations of Fredericks have built. Richard's voice rose. This merger with Westbrook will make us the largest medical technology company in the hemisphere. Billions in value. Thousands of jobs. I won't let that be jeopardized by a scandal. My son is not a scandal, James said quietly. He's family. Richard leaned forward. Be reasonable, Jamie. The boy has lived 12 years without you. His mother has raised him alone. They have their life. We have ours. Why disrupt everything now? Because it's the right thing to do, James replied simply. Because I've missed 12 years I can never get back. Because Danny deserves to know who he is and where he comes from. Even if it destroys everything else? Richard challenged. James met his father's gaze steadily. If acknowledging my own son destroys your precious company, then maybe it deserves to be destroyed. Richard's face flushed with anger. You ungrateful. I'm done here. James cut him off, turning toward the door. Stay away from Ava and Danny, both of you. Both? Richard frowned. You and the company, James clarified. I'm taking a leave of absence, effective immediately. Marion can handle the transition. You can't just walk away. Richard stood up. The Westbrook negotiations are at a critical stage. The board meeting is next week. James paused at the door. For once in my life, something matters more than this company. I suggest you get used to the idea. As he walked out, Richard called after him. This isn't over, Jamie. That boy will destroy everything if you bring him into this family. James didn't bother to respond. Ava sat on the edge of Danny's bed, watching her son methodically take apart and reassemble a small robot he'd built for his science class. His hands moved with precision, even as tears occasionally slipped down his cheeks. "I don't understand," he said finally, not looking up from his work. "If he didn't abandon us, if he didn't know about me, why didn't you try harder to find him?" The question cut deep. Ava had asked herself the same thing countless times over the years. "I did try, Danny," she said softly. "For months after you were born, I searched for him. I called the university, I wrote to his old address, but everyone told me the same thing, that he'd transferred schools and left no forwarding information." "And you believed them?" Danny's voice cracked slightly. "I had to," Ava replied. "I was 20 years old with a newborn baby. I was working 2 jobs, living in a studio apartment, trying to finish my nursing degree 1 class at a time. At some point, I had to accept that he was gone and focus on you, on our future." Danny set down his robot and finally looked at her. "Were you ever going to tell me the truth? That you didn't actually know why he left?" Ava felt tears well in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to spend your life wondering why your father didn't want to know you. It seemed kinder to say he never knew you existed." "But that was a lie," Danny said, his young face serious. "Yes," Ava admitted, "and I'm sorry for that. I thought I was doing what was best for you." Danny was quiet for a long moment, processing. "So, what happens now? Is he going to be part of our lives?" "That's up to you," Ava said carefully. "And to him. He wants to know you, to be your father. But nothing has to change if you don't want it to." "What about the man who came to school? James's dad?" Ava tensed. "He won't bother you again. James is going to make sure of that." "But why did he try to take me?" Danny persisted. "What does he want?" Ava sighed, wondering how much to explain. Danny was smart, too smart to accept a simplified version of the truth. "James's family owns a very large company," she began. "And because James is your father, you have certain rights in that company when you turn 13. Danny's eyes widened. "What kind of rights?" "Ownership rights. Voting rights. It's complicated, but essentially, you would have a say in how the company is run." "And his dad doesn't want that," Danny concluded. "He doesn't want me to have any power." "No," Ava agreed. "He doesn't." Danny was quiet again, thinking, is that why James came back? Because of the company stuff? "No," Ava said firmly. "James didn't know about any of this until last night. He came back because the storm brought him to our door, and fate let him find us again." "Do you believe in fate?" Danny asked skeptically. Ava smiled slightly. "I believe that sometimes the universe finds a way to fix what's broken, even if it takes 12 years. Danny picked up his robot again, turning it over in his hands. "I always wondered what he was like. My dad. I used to make up stories about him." "What kind of stories?" Ava asked gently. "Sometimes he was an astronaut on a secret mission, or a spy who couldn't contact us because it would put us in danger." Danny's voice grew quieter. "Sometimes he was just a regular guy who didn't want a kid." Ava's heart broke a little. "Danny, A knock at the front door interrupted her. They both froze, looking at each other. "Stay here," Ava said, rising from the bed. "Mom, what if it's that man again? James's dad?" "Then I'll handle it," Ava said with more confidence than she felt. She approached the door cautiously, wishing for a peephole. "Who is it?" "It's me," James's voice came through the door. "I need to talk to you both." Ava unlocked the door, relief washing over her. James stood there looking exhausted, his normally perfect appearance rumpled, as if he'd been running his hands through his hair repeatedly. "I saw my father," he said without preamble. "Come in." Ava stepped back, glancing toward Danny's room. "Danny and I were just talking." James entered, his movements hesitant, like he wasn't sure of his welcome. "How is he?" "Confused, hurt, processing," Ava replied, "but he's strong." "Like his mother," James said, softly. Before Ava could respond, Danny appeared in the hallway. He stood there for a moment, studying James with an intensity that reminded Ava so much of his father it made her chest ache. "Hi," Danny said finally. "Hi," James replied, his voice gentle. "Is it okay if I talk to you for a minute?" Danny glanced at Ava, who nodded encouragingly. "I guess." The three of them moved to the living room, an awkward family tableau. Danny sat in the armchair, leaving James and Ava to take the couch, careful space between them. "I owe you an apology, Danny," James began, "for a lot of things. For not being there all these years, even though I didn't know about you. For the way you found out today, and especially for my father's behavior." "Did you know he was going to try to take me?" Danny asked bluntly. "No," James said firmly, "and I would never have let that happen. I've made it very clear to him that he is to stay away from you and your mother." "Will he listen?" Ava asked. James's expression hardened. "He'll have to. I've taken a leave of absence from the company. I've told him I won't be part of any business that treats my son as a problem to be solved." Ava stared at him in surprise. "You left the company, but it's your life's work." "No," James said, looking at Danny. "It was my father's life's work, and his father's before him. I just followed the path that was laid out for me." "Because that's what sons do?" Danny asked, unexpectedly perceptive. James smiled slightly. "Sometimes, but sometimes sons have to find their own path. Even if it disappoints their fathers," Danny pressed. "Even then," James confirmed, "especially then if the father's expectations are wrong." Danny seemed to consider this. "So what happens now?" James looked to Ava, then back to Danny. "That's up to you, both of you. I'd like to be part of your life, Danny, to get to know you. But I understand if you need time. And the company stuff? The rights I supposedly have." James sighed. "That's complicated. Legally, yes, when you turn 13, you'll inherit certain rights through a trust my grandfather established, but you don't need to worry about that now." "But your father's worried about it," Ava pointed out. "He won't just give up." "No," James agreed. "He won't, which is why I've asked my lawyer to meet with us tomorrow, to discuss options for protecting Danny." "Protecting me how?" Danny frowned. James and Ava exchanged a look. "From the pressure my father will try to put on you," James explained carefully. "From being pulled into a corporate world you're too young to navigate." "You mean you want to keep me away from the company?" Danny said, his voice suddenly hard. "Just like your dad wanted to keep you away from Mom." The accusation hung in the air, stunning both adults. "No, Danny, that's not," James began. "It sounds the same to me," Danny cut him off, standing up. "You're both trying to control me, to decide what's best for me without asking what I want." "Danny!" Ava reached for him, but he stepped back. "I'm going to my room," he announced. "I need to think." After he left, James and Ava sat in stunned silence. "He's right," James finally said. "I'm doing exactly what my father did, trying to control the situation." "You're trying to protect him," Ava corrected gently. "By making decisions for him," James pointed out. "Just like my father always did for me," Ava sighed, leaning back against the couch. "So what do we do? He's 12, James. He can't possibly understand the complexities of corporate governance or trust law." "No," James agreed, "but he deserves to have a voice, to be part of the conversation about his own future." They sat quietly for a moment, the weight of parenting, of co-parenting, settling between them. "He has your stubbornness," Ava said finally, a small smile touching her lips. "And your moral compass," James replied. "Did you see how quickly he cut through all the justifications? Straight to the heart of the matter." "He's always been like that," Ava said proudly. "Sees right through excuses." Another silence fell, more comfortable this time. "Ava," James said hesitantly, "there's something else we need to discuss. About us." She tensed slightly. "James, I don't think—" "Not that," he clarified quickly. "I mean, not yet. We have enough to figure out with Danny. But my father raised a point I hadn't considered." "What's that?" "The press," James said grimly. "Once this gets out, and it will, there will be stories. About you, about Danny, about why we were separated. The Frederick name attracts attention." Ava hadn't thought about that. The idea of her private life, her son's life, becoming tabloid fodder made her stomach turn. "What can we do?" "Control the narrative," James suggested. "My PR team can help craft a statement. Something simple and dignified. No details. Just an acknowledgement that I recently discovered I have a son. that his mother and I were separated by circumstances beyond our control, and that we're focused on our son's well-being. And if reporters start digging, if they find out what your father did? James's expression darkened. Then he'll have to live with the consequences of his actions. For once. Before Ava could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It's the hospital. I need to take this. She stepped into the kitchen, leaving James alone with his thoughts. When she returned a few minutes later, her face was pale. What's wrong? James asked, immediately concerned. That was my supervisor, Ava said, her voice tight. I've been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into irregularities in my patient care documentation. What? That's ridiculous. It is, Ava agreed, because there are no irregularities. My records are meticulous. Everyone knows that. Understanding dawned on James's face. My father. Ava nodded grimly. Frederick Medical supplies all the monitoring equipment to Mercy Hospital. Your father is on the hospital board. He's trying to pressure you, James said, anger building in his voice. To make you vulnerable. Well, it's working, Ava admitted, sinking back onto the couch. I can't afford to lose this job, James. Not with Danny's medication costs. Not with rent going up again next month. James reached for her hand without thinking. You won't get away with this. I promise you that. Ava didn't pull away, too shocked by this new development to focus on the warmth of his touch. How can he do this? Use his power to threaten my livelihood. My ability to care for our son. Because that's who he is, James said grimly. He identifies a pressure point, and he exploits it. He's done it his whole life. What are we going to do? Ava asked, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. For 12 years, she'd handled every crisis alone, found solutions to every problem. But this was beyond her resources. First, we document everything, James said, his business mind taking over. The timing of this investigation, the lack of prior warnings or issues with your work. Then my lawyer contacts the hospital board, pointing out the obvious conflict of interest and hinting at potential legal action for wrongful termination and harassment. And in the meantime, I still have bills to pay, James. He squeezed her hand gently. Let me help, please. Ava stiffened. I don't want your money. It's not about the money, James insisted. It's not letting my father win, about not letting him use financial pressure to control you, to control us. Before Ava could respond, Danny's voice came from the hallway. Mom? What's wrong? I heard you talking about losing your job. They both turned to see him standing there, worry etched on his young face. Ava quickly wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. It's just a misunderstanding at work, honey, she said, trying to sound reassuring. Nothing for you to worry about. It's because of me, isn't it? Danny asked, his voice tight. Because of the company stuff. James's dad is trying to hurt you to get to me. James and Ava exchanged a look of surprise. Danny was connecting dots faster than either of them had anticipated. Danny, this isn't your fault, James said firmly, standing up. This is my father's doing, and I'm going to fix it. How? Danny challenged. By giving him what he wants? By keeping me away from the company? No, James said after a moment. By standing up to him, together. Danny studied him skeptically. What does that mean? James took a deep breath. It means we stop hiding. We stop letting him dictate the terms. We acknowledge publicly that you're my son, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. James, Ava began, concern in her voice. I know it's scary, he said, looking between her and Danny, for both of you, but my father thrives in shadows. He manipulates and threatens when he thinks no one is watching. So we turn on the lights. You want to go public? Ava clarified. Make an announcement? Yes, James nodded. But more than that. I want to take Danny to the Frederick building tomorrow. Introduce him to the board members, the executives. Make it clear that he's my son, and that any attack on his mother is an attack on the Frederick family itself. Isn't that dangerous? Ava asked. Putting Danny in your father's path? Not if we do it right, James said. Not if we're together. My father is powerful, but even he has to maintain certain appearances. He won't risk looking like the villain in front of the entire company. Danny had been listening intently. I want to go, he said suddenly. I want to meet him, your dad. I want to see the company that's supposedly mine. Danny, I don't think... Ava began. Mom, please, Danny interrupted. All my life I've wondered about my dad, about his family. Now I find out I have a grandfather, a whole other part of who I am. Don't I deserve to know? Ava looked at her son. Really looked at him. In the past 24 hours his world had been turned upside down. Yet here he stood, chin raised, eyes determined. So much like his father it made her heart ache. It's not that simple, she tried to explain. Richard Frederick is not a good man. He separated me and James. He tried to take you from school today. Now he's threatening my job. All the more reason I should meet him, Danny insisted, so I can see for myself. James knelt down to Danny's eye level. Danny, I need you to understand something. My father is complicated. He believes he's doing what's best for the company, for the family legacy. But his methods are wrong. If we do this, if we go there tomorrow, it won't be easy. I know, Danny said simply, but I'm not afraid of him. James felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly took his breath away. You're braver than I was at your age. Danny shrugged. I have Mom. She taught me to stand up for myself. James glanced up at Ava, who was watching them with a mixture of fear and resignation. She's a good teacher. After a moment, Ava sighed. If we do this, and I'm not saying we will, we need ground rules. Danny stays with one of us at all times. At the first sign of trouble, we leave, and we have a lawyer present. Agreed, James said immediately. All of it. And, Ava continued, we need to be clear about what we're trying to accomplish. Is this about protecting my job? About introducing Danny to the company? Or about confronting your father? All of the above, James admitted. But mostly it's about taking control of our own story, not letting my father dictate how this plays out. Danny looked between them. So, we're doing it? We're going to the Frederick building tomorrow? Ava and James exchanged a long look. Years of separation and misunderstanding hanging between them, but also something new, a shared purpose, a common goal. Yes, Ava said finally. We're doing it. The Frederick Medical Technologies headquarters dominated the downtown skyline, 90 stories of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds. Danny pressed his face to the car window as they approached, eyes wide. You work here? He asked James, who sat beside him in the back of the town car. I did, James corrected. I'm on leave now, remember? But you're still one of the owners, right? Yes, James nodded, along with other family members and shareholders. And soon me, Danny said, more statement than question. James glanced at Ava, who sat across from them, tension evident in every line of her body. Yes, when you turn 13, you'll become a beneficiary of the Frederick Family Trust, which includes a significant ownership stake in the company. What does that mean exactly? Danny asked. What would I have to do? Nothing you don't want to, James assured him. The trust is managed by trustees until you're older, but it does give you certain rights that my father is concerned about. Like what? Like the ability to block major decisions if they're not in your best interest, James explained. My grandfather set it up that way to protect future generations from exactly the kind of power plays my father specializes in. The car pulled into the underground parking garage, stopping near a private elevator. A woman in a sharp suit stood waiting, along with a distinguished-looking man with silver hair. That's Marion, my father's assistant, James explained. And Thomas Grayson, our family attorney. Our family, Danny repeated quietly, testing the words. Ava reached across to squeeze his hand. Remember what we discussed. You stay with me or James at all times. If anything makes you uncomfortable, we leave immediately. Danny nodded solemnly. I remember. As they exited the car, Thomas Grayson stepped forward, extending his hand first to James, then to Ava. Miss Mitchell, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've been briefed on the situation." "Thank you for coming on such short notice," James said. "When a Frederick calls, I answer," Thomas replied with a small smile, "especially when it involves the trust." He turned his attention to Danny. "And you must be Daniel. The resemblance is remarkable." Danny straightened slightly under the attorney's gaze. "It's Danny, actually." "Danny it is," Thomas agreed easily. "Well, Danny, today is going to be quite educational for you. But remember, you're under no obligation to make any decisions or sign anything. That's why I'm here." "Is my grandfather upstairs?" Danny asked, looking toward the elevator. Marion, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Mr. Frederick is in a board meeting on the 88th floor. He's been informed of your arrival." "Good," James said firmly. "Then let's not keep him waiting." The elevator ride was swift and silent. Ava stood close to Danny, one hand on his shoulder, while James and Thomas exchanged quiet words. Marion kept her eyes fixed on the climbing floor numbers, her expression carefully neutral. When the doors opened on the executive floor, Ava gasped softly. The space was magnificent. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, walls of glass offering panoramic views of the city. Artwork that belonged in museums hung on the walls, and sleek modern furniture created conversation areas throughout the vast space. "This way," Marion directed, leading them toward a set of double doors at the end of the corridor. As they approached, the doors opened, and several men and women in business attire emerged, talking quietly among themselves. They fell silent when they spotted James and his companions. "James," one of the men said, surprise evident in his voice. "We weren't expecting you today." "Change of plans, Howard," James replied smoothly. "I'd like you all to meet someone important." He placed a hand gently on Danny's shoulder. "This is my son, Daniel Mitchell. Danny, these are members of the Frederick Medical Board of Directors." The executives exchanged glances, some curious, others concerned. A woman with short gray hair stepped forward, extending her hand to Danny. "Hello, Danny. I'm Victoria Westbrook. I've known your father since he was about your age." "Hi," Danny said, shaking her hand with the politeness Ava had instilled in him. "Do you work here too?" Victoria smiled. "Not exactly. My company, Westbrook Pharmaceuticals, is in discussions to merge with Frederick Medical. It would be quite a significant development." "The merger," James explained to Ava. "The one my father is so concerned about." Understanding dawned on Ava's face. "The one he thinks Danny might complicate." "Precisely," Victoria confirmed, her gaze sharp. "Though I must say, James, this is quite a revelation. Your father gave no indication." "My father has kept many secrets over the years," James said, his voice carrying down the corridor. "Including the existence of my son. But that ends today." The executives murmured among themselves, clearly processing this unexpected development. Howard, a balding man with nervous eyes, leaned toward James. "The meeting's still in progress," he said quietly. "Your father and the core team are reviewing the final merger terms." "Perfect timing," James replied. "Shall we, Danny?" Danny looked up at his mother, who nodded encouragingly despite the anxiety evident in her eyes. Together, the unusual family procession moved toward the boardroom doors, Thomas Grayson and Victoria Westbrook following close behind. Marion stepped ahead to open the doors. "Mr. Frederick, your son has arrived, with guests." The boardroom fell silent as they entered. At the head of a massive table sat Richard Frederick, his imperious gaze fixed on the doorway. Around him sat 5 other executives, papers spread before them, expressions ranging from curious to alarmed. Richard stood slowly, his eyes moving from James to Ava, and finally settling on Danny. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps even a hint of emotion, before his features hardened again. "This is highly inappropriate," he said coldly. "We're in the middle of a confidential meeting." "Nothing about this company should be confidential to its owners," James replied, guiding Danny further into the room. "And in 3 months, Danny becomes one of those owners. I thought it was time he saw what he'll be inheriting." Richard's jaw tightened. "James, I won't have this discussion in front of..." "In front of whom, Dad?" James challenged. Your grandson, the board, or Miss Westbrook, who I'm sure is fascinated to learn how the CEO of Frederick Medical manipulates his family and threatens innocent people to maintain control?" Victoria Westbrook raised an eyebrow but remained silent, watching the drama unfold with keen interest. Richard's face flushed with anger. "You're making a spectacle of yourself and dragging a child into corporate matters he couldn't possibly understand." "I understand more than you think," Danny said suddenly, his young voice steady in the tense room. "I understand that you tried to take me from school yesterday, that you're threatening my mom's job, that you separated my parents before I was born." The boardroom went completely still. All eyes moved between Danny and Richard, the confrontation between the youngest and oldest Fredericks creating an electric tension. Richard recovered first, his expression softening into something that might have passed for grandfatherly concern. "Young man, you've been misinformed. I was simply trying to meet you, to welcome you to the family. As for your mother's employment situation, I have no involvement in hospital staffing decisions." "Don't lie to him," Ava spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "Not when he's brave enough to face you directly." Richard's gaze shifted to her, cold and assessing. "Ms. Mitchell, still inserting yourself where you don't belong, I see." "That's enough," James said sharply. "Dad, we're here for 3 reasons. First, to introduce Danny to his heritage, the company that will one day be partly his. Second, to make it clear that any action against Ava or her employment will be met with immediate legal response." He nodded toward Thomas Grayson, who inclined his head in confirmation. "And the third reason?" Richard asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "To give you a choice," James said. "You can accept Danny as your grandson, welcome him into this family with the respect and care he deserves, or you can continue this war, in which case I will take everything I know about your methods, your manipulations, and your ethical breaches to the board, to the press, and to the Justice Department if necessary." Gasps and murmurs erupted around the table. Victoria Westbrook leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "You would destroy your own family's company?" Richard asked incredulously. "Everything we've built?" "I would protect my son," James corrected, "something you never understood about being a father." Richard's eyes narrowed, calculating as always. His gaze moved to Danny, who stood tall beside his parents, watching the grandfather he'd never known with wary curiosity. "The boy does look like you," Richard finally said. "Same chin, same eyes." "He has a name," Ava said firmly. "It's Danny." Richard ignored her, focusing on his grandson. "Do you know what this company does, boy? We save lives. Our medical devices are in hospitals around the world. Millions of people are alive because of what the Frederick family has built." "I know," Danny replied. "Mom uses your equipment at Mercy Hospital. She says the ventilators are the best in the industry." A flicker of surprise crossed Richard's face. "Your mother works with our equipment?" "I'm a critical care nurse," Ava explained reluctantly. "Or I was until your investigation put me on leave." Something shifted in Richard's expression, not quite remorse, but perhaps recalculation. "I see." Victoria Westbrook cleared her throat. "Richard, perhaps we should adjourn this meeting and give you time with your family." Richard glanced at her, then back at James and Danny. The room held its breath, waiting for his decision. "The merger documents will need to be revised," he said finally, "to account for the trust activation when the boy turns 13. "Danny," James corrected firmly. "When Danny turns 13, Richard amended, the name clearly foreign on his tongue. Victoria nodded. "Of course, our legal teams can work through the implications." She stood, gathering her papers. "James, it was illuminating to meet your son. Ms. Mitchell, a pleasure." She paused by Danny on her way out. "Young man, you've caused quite a stir in the corporate world today. Well done." As the boardroom emptied, leaving only the Frederick family, Thomas Grayson, and Ava, Richard sank back into his chair, suddenly looking his age. "You forced my hand," he said to James. "I hope you're prepared for the consequences." "The only consequence I care about," James replied, "is making sure Danny and Ava are safe from your manipulations. The rest is just business. Richard's gaze moved to Ava. The hospital will receive a call within the hour. Your situation will be resolved. Thank you, she said stiffly. Don't thank me, Richard replied. I'm merely acknowledging reality. The boy is a Frederick, whether I like it or not. Danny, James, Ava, and Danny himself corrected in unison. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly at their unified correction. For a brief moment, something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Danny, he conceded, studying his grandson more carefully, you have your father's stubbornness, and your mother's directness. Thank you, Danny said, surprising everyone. My mom says being stubborn isn't always bad. It depends what you're stubborn about. A ghost of a smile touched Richard's lips. Your mother is a wise woman. Ava blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected compliment. Now, Richard continued, his business demeanor returning, since it appears we're to be family. There are matters to discuss. The trust, the company, your education. Dad, James warned, this isn't the time for— It's okay, Danny interrupted, stepping forward. I want to know, Richard gestured to a chair. Sit. Danny glanced at his parents, who nodded cautiously, then took the offered seat. James and Ava moved to stand behind him, a united front of parental protection. The Frederick Family Trust was established by my father, Richard began, his tone shifting to something almost professorial. He believed that families should always have control of the company, not outside investors. When you turn 13, you become a beneficiary. What does that mean exactly? Danny asked. It means, Thomas Grayson interjected gently, that you will own approximately 15% of Frederick Medical Technologies. Not directly. The shares remain in the trust, but you will have certain voting rights that come with that ownership. Danny's eyes widened. 15% of the whole company. Yes, Richard confirmed, which at current valuation is worth roughly $3 billion. Ava made a small, choked sound behind Danny. James placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. But I don't know anything about running a company, Danny said, his voice small for the first time since entering the building. You won't be running anything, Richard assured him, not unkindly. The trustees manage the day-to-day voting decisions until you're 21, but for major decisions, mergers, acquisitions, changes to the corporate charter, your approval is required. Like the Westbrook merger, Danny concluded, connecting the dots. Richard nodded, a flicker of surprise crossing his face at the boy's quickness. Precisely. And you were worried I'd mess it up, Danny said bluntly. That's why you tried to— What? Get me away from Mom? Make me disappear? Richard's jaw tightened. I was attempting to assess the situation to understand what kind of influence your mother might have over you. My mom doesn't tell me what to think, Danny said firmly. She teaches me how to think for myself. Ava felt tears prick her eyes at her son's words. 12 years of single motherhood, of struggling and sacrificing, and somehow she'd raised this remarkable boy who could stand his ground in a corporate boardroom against one of the most powerful men in the city. I see that now, Richard acknowledged, studying Danny with new interest. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Danny asked. Richard's gaze flicked briefly to Ava. Someone more malleable. Because I was raised by a single mom, Danny challenged, or because we don't have money? Both, Richard admitted with surprising candor. I was wrong. The simple admission hung in the air, stunning both James and Ava. Richard Frederick did not admit mistakes. Not to his executives, not to his board, and certainly not to his family. So what happens now? Danny asked, looking between his newly discovered grandfather and his parents. Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in thought. Now we adapt. The merger proceeds with amendments accounting for the trust. Your mother's employment situation is resolved immediately. He glanced at Ava, with appropriate compensation for the misunderstanding. And Danny? James pressed. What are your intentions toward my son? Richard considered the question carefully. He is a Frederick, whatever our personal differences. He deserves to know his heritage, to understand the legacy he will one day help shape. And if he chooses a different path? Ava asked. if he doesn't want to be part of this world? That would be unfortunate, Richard said, but the trust gives him that freedom. My father was quite insistent that future generations not be forced into roles that didn't suit them. Your father sounds smarter than you, Danny said, then immediately looked mortified at his own boldness. To everyone's shock, Richard laughed, a short, rusty sound, as if the mechanism had gone unused for years. He was much smarter than me, and he would have liked you, Danny. The tension in the room eased slightly, not gone but transformed into something more navigable. I have conditions, Ava said suddenly, stepping forward. If Danny is to be part of this family, part of this company. Richard raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to— I'm his mother, Ava cut him off. That puts me in exactly the right position. James smiled slightly, pride evident in his expression. Very well, Richard said after a moment. What are these conditions? First, Danny's education remains as it is. No private boarding schools. No being shipped off to prepare him for his role. He stays with me, in his current school with his friends. Richard frowned but nodded. Acceptable, though I would suggest supplemental tutoring in business and finance. If Danny wants it, Ava stipulated. Second, no using him as a pawn in company politics. No parading him at events or using him to influence shareholders. Within reason, Richard countered. There are certain family obligations that come with a Frederick name. Third, Ava continued, you will never again attempt to separate Danny from me or make decisions about his life without my involvement. We are a package deal. Richard's gaze moved between Ava and James, something calculating in his expression. And what about my son? Where does he fit in this package deal? The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Ava felt heat rise to her cheeks. That's between James and me, she said firmly. It's not a corporate negotiation. Everything is a negotiation, Miss Mitchell, Richard replied, but I take your point. He turned to Danny. And what about you, young man? Do you have conditions of your own? Danny thought for a moment, his young face serious. Just one. Don't lie to me about anything, even if you think it's to protect me or because I'm too young to understand. I want the truth. Richard studied his grandson with newfound respect. Truth is a rare commodity in business, Danny, but within the family, yes, I can agree to that. Then I guess we have a deal, Danny said, extending his hand across the table with a formality that made James smile. Richard hesitated only briefly before shaking it. Indeed we do. As they prepared to leave, Richard called out to James. A word, son, privately. James glanced at Ava, who nodded. We'll wait by the elevator. When they were alone, Richard moved to the window, looking out over the city his family had helped build. You love them, both of them. It wasn't a question, but James answered anyway. Yes, even after 12 years apart, even knowing she raised your son without you. She didn't have a choice, James said. You made sure of that. Richard didn't deny it. And now, what are your intentions? James joined his father at the window. To be Danny's father. To make up for lost time. To support Ava however she needs. And if she doesn't want you back, Richard asked bluntly. Then I'll respect her decision, James replied. But I'll still be Danny's father. Richard nodded slowly. Your mother would be proud of you today. Standing up to me, protecting your family. The mention of his mother, dead now for 10 years, caught James off guard. You never talk about her. Because it hurts, Richard said simply. Losing her. It changed me, not for the better. The admission, so unexpected, left James momentarily speechless. Don't make my mistakes, Richard continued, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Don't let the company become more important than the people you love. Is that what happened with you and Mom? James asked. Richard's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late to fix it. Don't wait that long, Jamie. The use of his childhood nickname struck James like a physical touch. I won't, he promised. 3 months later, Ava stood in her small kitchen, putting final touches on a birthday cake. 13 candles waited to be lit, arranged carefully on the chocolate frosting that Danny had requested. Need any help? James asked, entering with a stack of paper plates. I think I've got it, Ava replied with a smile. though you could check if the ice cream is firm enough yet. Their easy domesticity still surprised her sometimes. In the months since the confrontation at Frederick Tower, they had fallen into a comfortable routine. James coming over for dinner several nights a week, helping Danny with science projects, occasionally taking them both to company events where Danny was gradually being introduced to the business world that would one day be partly his. Richard had kept his word, both about Ava's job and about respecting their boundaries with Danny. He'd even begun showing up for Sunday dinners once a month, awkward at first, but gradually finding common ground with his grandson over chess and discussions about the future of medical technology. "Danny's friend should be here soon," James said, checking his watch. "And my father texted that he's running late, but will be here for cake." "Of course he is," Ava said with a small eye roll. Heaven forbid he missed the official moment his grandson activates the trust. James chuckled. "He's trying, Ava, in his own way." "I know," she admitted, "and Danny likes him, which still baffles me." "They're a lot alike," James observed. "Both stubborn, both brilliant, both fascinated by how things work." "God help us all," Ava muttered. But there was no real heat in it. James moved closer, helping her arrange candles. "Have you thought any more about us?" Ava's hands stilled. They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks. "James, It's okay if you're not ready," he said quickly. "I understand. 12 years is a long time. We're different people now." "That's just it," Ava said, turning to face him. "We are different people. I'm not that starry-eyed college girl anymore. I'm a mother, a nurse. I've built a life without you." "I know," James acknowledged, "and I respect that life. I'm not asking you to give anything up." "Aren't you?" Ava challenged gently. "Your world and mine are so different, James. The way you live, the circles you move in." "None of that matters to me," he insisted. "What matters is that when I lost you 12 years ago, something inside me broke. And being with you and Danny these past months has started to heal that break." Ava felt tears threaten. "It's not that simple." "It can be," James said, taking her hand, "if we want it to be." Before she could respond, the doorbell rang, followed by the sound of excited teenage voices in the hallway. "Saved by the bell," Ava said with a small smile. "We'll talk later, okay?" James nodded, squeezing her hand before releasing it. "Later." The apartment soon filled with Danny's friends, noise and laughter spilling from every corner. Ava watched her son, 13 today, officially a teenager, holding court among his peers, confident and happy. James moved easily among the kids, helping with the video game tournament Danny had requested instead of a more traditional party. When Richard arrived, bearing a gift-wrapped package that was clearly a laptop, Ava met him at the door. "Right on time," she observed. "The trust activates at 4:17, right? The exact time of his birth." Richard had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I wanted to be here for Danny. The trust is secondary." "Is it?" Ava challenged, but without malice. "It's becoming so," Richard admitted. "He's quite a remarkable young man, Ava. You did well with him." The compliment, so unexpected, left her momentarily speechless. "Thank you," she finally managed. Richard glanced around the modest apartment, taking in the mismatched furniture, the carefully patched curtains, the small dining table now covered with pizza boxes and soda cans. "You know, with the trust activated, Danny could afford a very different life. A bigger home, private school, opportunities." "We've discussed it," Ava said. "He doesn't want to move. He doesn't want things to change too much, too fast." "Wise beyond his years," Richard nodded. "Like his mother." Before Ava could respond to this unexpected compliment, Danny spotted his grandfather and bounded over. "You came," he exclaimed, genuine pleasure in his voice. "I said I would," Richard replied, handing over the package. "Happy birthday, Danny." As Danny tore into the wrapping paper, Ava felt James come up beside her, his presence warm and solid. "He looks happy," James observed quietly. "He is," Ava agreed. "Despite everything, despite all the complications, he's happy." "And you?" James asked, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "Are you happy, Ava?" She turned to look at him, really look at him, the man who had walked back into her life on a snowy night 3 months ago, the father of her son. The boy she had once loved, now grown into a man she was coming to respect, and perhaps to love again in a new way. "I'm getting there," she said honestly. "One day at a time." James smiled, understanding in his eyes. "That's all I can ask for." Across the room, Danny was showing off his new laptop to his friends. Richard standing awkwardly nearby, clearly out of his element, but making an effort. The scene was so far from anything Ava could have imagined a year ago that it almost made her dizzy. "Time for cake," she called, bringing the conversation around her to a halt. As they gathered around the table, Danny in the center with James and Ava on either side of him, Richard standing somewhat stiffly behind, Ava felt a strange sense of completion. Their family was unconventional, complicated, still finding its footing. But it was theirs. "Make a wish," she told Danny as she lit the candles. Danny looked around at the faces surrounding him. His mother, who had always been his rock. His father, who was working so hard to make up for lost time. Even his grandfather, who was slowly, awkwardly trying to be part of their lives. Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and blew. All 13 candles went out in a single breath. "What did you wish for?" one of his friends called out. Danny smiled, a smile that reminded Ava so much of James it made her heart ache in the best possible way. "Can't tell," he said, "or it won't come true." But as his eyes met hers across the table, Ava thought she knew. Not for wealth, or power, or any of the trappings that came with the Frederick name, but for what he'd always had, in one form or another. Family, love, belonging. And watching James cut the cake, his hand steady and sure as he served the first piece to their son, Ava realized that perhaps that wish was already coming true. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want to thank you for coming on this journey with me. Life is full of second chances if we're brave enough to take them. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we need to forgive to move forward. And sometimes, family isn't just what we're born into. It's what we build, one difficult conversation, one act of courage, one moment of forgiveness at a time. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and join our community of storytellers and listeners. Drop a comment below sharing a time when forgiveness changed your life. And remember, your self-worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion of you. It's something no one can take away. Until next time, this is Benjamin with Consequential Stories, reminding you that every ending is just the beginning of a new chapter.